We spend a lot of time on this show talking about the technical aspects of ASP.NET Core, how to do stuff from the programmer's perspective. But how does this look from the business perspective? What's the value proposition? How do we move to new technologies inside of the business? We're very lucky today to have a guest on the show, Jeffrey Palermo, who's going to talk all about how to move .NET or move your organization to .NET Core.
Let's mash on that.
Awesome. Okay, well, welcome everybody to the ASP.NET Monsters. We are, as Simon gave an intro, we are lucky to be sitting here with Jeffrey Palermo from Clear Measure down here in Austin, Texas. It is hot.
I don't know why anybody lives here. I can't understand it.
I like when you walk outside, someone just smacks you. And
it's nice in here.
It's nice in here. I just go from building to building. Okay, so today our topic is, we've got a whole bunch of developers who are getting excited about this, and one of the questions that's been coming to us has been, okay, but when do I go? When do I make the jump? And we're not often in the position as a developer on a project to say, okay, business, it's time to make the move. But there's probably a case that we can make. And so, when we're trying to do that, what are the kinds of things that a business needs? Where do we start? How do we identify the pitfalls? How does that all start to play out? You've had experience with a lot of really big projects. So how do we start to make those right decisions?
Sure. Well, here at Clear Measure, we're in the research and spiking phase on quite a few applications where we're planning, because it's not something where you just jump, you take the leap, because it's new for everybody. Even experts that have been going through the beta cycle, it's not something where you take a large system and you just do a cutover and expect success.
Right.
So there's a few key areas that just anyone's going to have to take care of, and a key one is dependencies.
Sure.
So some key common dependencies like in-service bus or OData or SignalR and other popular libraries, NuGet packages. They have their own release schedules, and they have to upgrade to .NET Core if you rely on them and want to take the application that depends on them up as well.
Right, and I suppose for certain organizations as well, one of the neat things that's been happening as Microsoft has moved to an open source model is that a lot of those organizations have moved to open source as well. Mm-hmm. And so things like SignalR, if that's a dependency and you're looking ahead on the roadmap and you're saying, look, this is something that we want to build, we want real time in it, we want to start it this next quarter, might be an opportunity to even get your hands into that open source space, and as a company, if you wanted to invest in it, do some pull requests and things like that.
Right, because it might not be that big of a deal for a dependent open source library to actually make the leap, but until they actually do and publish a new NuGet package, everyone else can't move.
Right.
And so you might be the one with the pull request for that new version.
Right, and so organizationally, or from a code perspective, the way you have things organized, that might also play into things.
Here's a pitfall we see time and time again, because a lot of our clients, they come to us, management comes to us with the question, how do I get more out of my custom software systems? How do I get more out of my software engineering team?
Right.
And so one of the things we see over and over again is the structure of the source control and the structure of the Visual Studio application can yield an environment that makes it hard to upgrade to .NET Core. For instance, there's a large Visual Studio solution, and it actually realistically has multiple applications in it, and it has we see them, upwards of over a dozen, 2 dozen, 4 dozen projects in a Visual Studio solution where really that's just not one application. That's multiple applications that kind of are jammed in the same solution. And if one piece of it that has all the project references, one piece of it depends on something that isn't quite ready for .NET Core, well then the entire thing can't move. And so you can wait and upgrade it all. Of course, the problem is you haven't structured your software suite appropriately, and the solution is to break out the multiple applications into what they are, multiple applications, and manage them independently, version them independently. You don't have to go the whole microservices route, but just in the middle, if you have a large Visual Studio solution, chances are you've got more than one application in there, and you're going to struggle with dependencies moving to .NET Core.
And 6 months ago, there were other inhibitors, for example, build chain and build servers and whatnot. Those things were a blocker, but Simon, those aren't anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff has kind of gone away, so it's a lot easier to do stuff, and it's going to be even easier in subsequent versions of .NET Core. So things like the CS project file coming back, it's going to make migration path a little bit easier for people. I think stuff's going to be a little bit more familiar than it was with a JSON project file. No, I loved that JSON project file.
I loved it dearly. It was like, sometimes I just printed a copy of it out and I just put it under my pillow because it was like, no, the CS project thing was an area of contention, and it's coming back, but the reality is that in these scenarios, and when we're looking at, especially from an enterprise perspective, when you have like a lot of stuff that is already rooted in that model, and it's what people know and what the tooling supports. I think that was probably the biggest thing, was that it was the Visual Studio tooling.
But that was all pre-release. I think most people we kind of keep up with all the pre-beta cycles and all what they're thinking about doing, and so it may be news for some people that CS projects weren't going to be there, because in reality, I think the majority of the market that's on .NET is going to move from CS projects with their current version .NET, and when they move to .NET Core, it's going to be CS projects on .NET Core. And yeah, there was this turbulence and thought process of changing it,
right?
But in the reality, for most of the market, they won't even have messed with it because it'll just be there.
Because the .NET Core was developed so in the open, like we saw this stuff that
thrashing.
I'm sure this happened in previous versions, but it happened behind the scenes, and now we're getting a taste of what it's like inside Microsoft, that these people who are building .NET Core, they don't have all the answers from day one. So they are thinking about this stuff. They are going through the process of evolving the software. And we've never seen it before, and now we have. Because before, it's always just been like people in the ivory tower come down with the latest version. Now we've seen the sausage factory.
Right. And it is it's something that, if you have been watching, has been really interesting to see, because they are doing it out in the open, even to the point where there's the roadmap with the dates for releases and things like that. But when they're internally thrashing over a particular issue, that's an issue on GitHub, and you can actually just see the source code, and you can be a part of that. There's some conversations that end up with like hundreds of responses plus, right? So there's some pretty cool stuff there.
And for OData, when someone's asked OData and you see the won't fix for V1, when that decision is made, you see that, and then conversations start.
No is an answer in enterprises. That is way undervalued, and people are too afraid of. But no is an answer, and that's I think it's a good thing now. So if you want to start moving in these directions, you've looked at your build chain, and you think that you've got some deployment stuff covered off. You know that the project you've picked a project or a pilot or something that can move over. Then what's next?
Okay, so 2 items: how to prep for the upgrade and how to pitch to your manager. Okay. So how to prep. There's a few main concepts. One is do a research spike. Have one person kind of research, start to figure out what other issues people are running into just by doing searches on the internet, and then create a branch off to the side and just do some experimentation to see if, hey, you got it working in 1 hour and there was no issues on the one hand, or you spent a couple hours and you still weren't any further because you have a lot of issues in your particular application. Do not do a let's upgrade to .NET Core sprint. It's going to fail. It's just going to fail. One, the business is going to hate it because they're basically going to you're stopping the bus. You're saying, hey, we're not going to work this sprint. We're not going to work this iteration.
There's no visible output that will benefit the business.
Right, because they say, oh, what are they doing? Oh, they're doing some techie stuff. Oh, they're playing again. Because they don't see anything. And so for preparing, you also want to isolate the risk. For instance, if you have a really big application and then you have a small, maybe an offline batch job that does something small, pick the smallest, easiest application for your first upgrade. You want one risk, and that is compatibility. You want to deal with the compatibility risk you don't want to deal with multiple risks at the same time. So you pick the easiest application in your whole suite to experiment on, because you're gonna learn what you don't know. And so that's the way to prepare for the upgrade.
So there is a learning component. There are new patterns. There are new interfaces and classes to inherit from. There's new approaches. There's things that we don't need to do anymore because it's now part of the framework, and there's things that are no longer in the framework. So Simon, can you take a team and just say, okay, here we go, flip into .NET Core and let's do this project?
I think from a technical perspective, it's pretty close. Like there's a few things that are missing in .NET Core. I think jumps to my mind is like the asynchronous programming model that was popular in .NET 2, I think it was. So that went away.
The callbacks.
Yeah, like the begin and end request sorts of things. That's coming back in subsequent releases, much to my chagrin. But it is going to be there. So there is like that sort of thing. Like technically, I don't think that .NET Core is as different from .NET as it used to be, certainly, or as people perceive it to be. Like when we first heard about .NET Core, then the word on the street was like, this is going to be the same technical scope as it was transitioning from web forms to MVC. Like, that was a huge technical leap, and in my mind, it was even bigger than that. Like it was huge. It was going to be a huge rewrite, and it's been pulled back since then. So it's not as big anymore. And I think you could be, if you were like an ASP.NET MVC developer, you could be productive on .NET Core inside of 2 days. I don't think it would be a big deal.
Right.
From my view, it was huge. It still is huge, but they're backfilling more parts of the backwards compatibility story, which Microsoft has always invested heavily in. So it still has they didn't cut back on any of the ambitious achievements. They just are filling in more parts of the backwards compatibility story. We haven't lost any capabilities in the shifts.
So, okay, our team is ready. We've mitigated some of those risks. We've taken on some of these spikes to figure out where we're at, and then what? Like we've already got some things happening here, but there's still more to do. So what's
well,
next?
You have a conversation with the person that makes the priority decisions on what to do here, the manager.
So going to the management then, is it appropriate to bring cake? Like, should we bring cake to the
only chocolate?
Chocolate cake? Okay, that's a good win.
There's an air guitar icing on top.
Air guitar icing. Okay.
That picture.
Perfect.
So yeah, you got to make the pitch, but ahead of time, it's good to keep. Now, development managers probably already knows that frameworks move on. But for instance, if you have a development group where it's just the development team, you and a handful of coworkers that are in a company, and maybe you report to the VP of operations who is off doing some other technical stuff, non-technical stuff for their industry, then you have to educate them. And so if you got to do your research and you got to know the business benefits to actually make a pitch that makes sense from a business perspective, because there's no technology reason that you're going to be able to pitch to a non-software manager, because you don't want it to come across as, hey, here's new and shiny, will you let us do new and shiny?
The reality is that for most cases, when you've got like a quote unquote finished application that's in production and you're a maintenance support team or whatever the case may be, there's not really a compelling argument to jump from 4.6.1 or even maybe 4.5 or 4 to go over to .NET Core and just do a rewrite, right?
No, not until a major capability is going to be worked on.
Right. So a rewrite is not the right value proposition.
Right.
So what are the catalysts then? What's going to move a company towards having to embracing .NET
Core?
Core?
You have a baseline business benefit of the new framework where it's the exact same language and it's a very familiar framework. So the risk is low just across the board. Microsoft has a really good story for backwards compatibility. Even just recently, we're doing some COM integration so that an ASP Classic website could send an in-service bus message to be handled by the latest .NET framework over Azure Service Bus. So Microsoft has kept a really good backwards compatibility story, and they kept on going with .NET Core. So 3 parts of the pitch. One, and certainly these are not the only ones, but one of our clients and a lot of clients out there, you have a big Microsoft-based system, a lot of .NET code, but some of the servers in that environment are Linux because you're integrating with a product that runs on Linux. You're crossing over. Well, up until now, you had to reach for a different programming language and you had to make your own type of interaction. Maybe you interacted via database, maybe you set up HTTP integration or dropped a file, read a file, but you've had to manage that outside of .NET. Well, now with .NET Core, you can extend with the upgrade. You can have that component of your system on .NET Core and manage it in a skill set that all of your developers have. So that's because Linux support. I know probably everyone's heard that .NET Core will run on Linux just like it runs on Windows.
Right.
And so if your system has had Linux servers, well, that's going to be really exciting for you. And management's going to want to know that because they've had to hear for a long time, oh, no, well, that's going to have to be done in the code. Right. Because it was always different, right? And, well, we're going to have to see when Bob can do that because Bob's the guy that does the code, right?
I hate the code.
Right.
It's always the hardest, and the editor's never good. And
That's right. And you didn't do it, so it wasn't tied into your continuous integration setup because it was different. So next is performance. Performance is huge. ASP.NET has traditionally lagged a lot of other frameworks. It's lagged Node.js, which is one of the hotnesses talked about. Well, now ASP.NET on .NET Core blows Node.js away. I mean, over an order of magnitude. It's in the top 10 of web frameworks in the world. Even some theoretical research frameworks that actually aren't even used in business.
Sure.
It is night and day different in performance, which is huge.
Running on Kestrel, which is cross-platform, and you can isolate it and spin it up into a smaller instance or a container or things like that. Yeah, for sure.
Right. And another one that's going to impact data center costs, which of course management is really going to understand, is the network isolation or the framework isolation. So up until this point, if you have any system with any type of history, you probably have one application that's on .NET 2. You probably have other applications on different parts of the framework. And over time, we've learned to not install more than one framework on a production server because it's just not worth the risk.
Right.
And so for significant systems been around all the time, you have a spread out number of servers, and maybe your application is more complex in nature, but not necessarily high scale. But you had to have a broad production environment in order to keep the frameworks isolated, not necessarily because you were scaling as high as Facebook. You had a broad system. So with .NET Core, the framework is actually deployed with the application, not as a server component, not as a add new features to the server, hit the checkbox. So
it's part of the dependency of the application locally, not at a system level.
Right. We've had a concept where you had the operating system, then you had the framework, then you had the application. Now we have the operating system and you have the application, and the framework essentially operates just like more NuGet packages. It's in the application, deployed with the application, and so there is no mathematical proof style, no possibility for conflict because it's just NuGet packages now. And you can increase your server density in the low scale environments, and you probably cut your data center down to a third of the cost just because of that change.
And Simon, there's actually probably an HR component, like a case to be made from attracting developers and or retaining developers as well.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. The first off, .NET Core is not so different from previous versions of .NET that you're going to have trouble finding people who have some experience with it. I guess this is often a concern I hear, like, oh, hey, let's go and use Erlang. Well, how big is the pool of Erlang developers here? And I know there's the argument of like, wow, if you're a developer and you can learn new things, but that's still a big investment in the business. And a lot of businesses are just looking to get somebody who knows it already. So the difference between .NET and .NET Core is not huge. Like I say, you can be up to speed on it pretty quickly. So your pool of developers is still under the same pool of developers that you had before. But at the same time, because it is something that's new and cool, in my mind at least, then it's something that you can use to attract developers too. They're like, hey, come over here. We've got this new .NET stuff, and there's this kind of idea of what these Magpie developers
Yes.
that are looking for like the cool new shiny thing. And we've got something cool new and shiny over here. You can come try it out.
As much as it's a nice argument to make a developer's developer, maybe someday it'll be that if you're an auto mechanic for a Ford, you can be an auto mechanic for a Toyota, and it's just like that. But in reality, where we are at the state of industry, it's just like, oh, I'm an auto mechanic for Ford, so obviously I'm going to be an awesome mechanic for your Tesla. Yes, it's a car, but it's
the same.
And so that's where we are in the software industry. So within the Microsoft stack, okay, yeah, there's enough similarities where it's all got a gas engine, it's all got, but in the industry as a whole, there's big differences between different languages.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is a Ford mechanic. I've really been trying to convince him to learn about electric cars because at some point I'm going to buy an electric car and I need somebody to maintain it. But he tells me the market isn't there yet.
Awesome. Okay, well, there is obviously a lot of stuff to think about and digest, and we mapped out some of it, and really appreciate your time with us here today.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. We're glad to have you. So if you look below your screen right now, down left in the
There it
floor,
is.
you'll see some links that we've put there, and also a place where you can click to share this video using the Twitters and the Facebooks and things like that.
Don't forget MySpace and ICQ. And
Oh, ICQ.
Friendster, that's out there? If you have a MySpace page, please add a link to our video.
And add us to your web ring.
it's gonna go to all my AOM's Messenger friends.
Perfect. Love it.
Good. We'll see everybody in the next episode.
Cheers.